Is it really fair to expect your partner to be like Coretta Scott King? She's a historical figure. Martin Luther King was a historical figure. And to me, it's just a lot of pressure on your partner to expect them to be at that level of greatness and sacrifice. What's up, y'all? This is Stacey from H Blues Word. Thank you for joining me. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. So unless you've been living under a rock, maybe by this time you have seen the Jonathan Majors interview that he did recently with ABC News's Linsey Davis. She asked him a lot of the typical questions. She asked him about his recent conviction. For those of you unfamiliar, Jonathan Majors was a rising star. He performed in several high-profile TV shows and movies, including The Lovecraft Country and Creed recently with Michael B. Jordan. And he was just really on the up and up, covering magazines, etc. And then all of a sudden, he got arrested for allegedly assaulting his ex-girlfriend, Grace Jabari. After the arrest, trial ended up happening. And like I said, he ended up getting convicted. He was charged on 4 counts, but got convicted on 2 of the 4 counts, which was reckless assault and harassment. Reckless meaning that the jury felt he did not intend to hurt Grace, but he just ultimately did hurt her. So during the interview, he denies again ever putting any hands on her. In fact, if you recall, when I was reporting this and other people were reporting it, there was some surveillance footage of Jonathan actually running away from Grace. I mean, I even kind of joked and said he was running from her like OJ back in 1968, you know, the black OJ, before 94 OJ when being chased in a Bronco. But the 68 OJ, you know, dipping and diving through football fields. Like he was just running block after block away from this woman. So to many of us, we were shocked that he was found guilty because he really looked like a man who did not want to harm her, but really just wanted to get away from her. In fact, that is what he said during the interview. He said, again, I never put my hands on her, that she lied when he claimed that he did put his hands on her when they were in the cab where there were no cameras. And even the cab driver said he did not see that, but he did see Grace apparently become aggressive with Jonathan. And Jonathan maintains that he never put his hands on her, even in the cab. But during the interview, he said if he could go back, one, he wouldn't be in that cab with her. He would have broken up with her because they had a pretty toxic relationship. And he felt at one point he really did not want to remain in the relationship, but he just didn't have the guts to leave, which I have to say a lot of people are in that position. You remain in toxic relationships, and then ultimately you learn you should have left earlier. So he's learned that lesson, but he remained in the relationship. So he was in the cab, but he says that if he could go back, he would have never placed her back in the cab, because there was a point where surveillance caught him placing her back in the cab because they were going back and forth. Like she was trying to get at his phone because allegedly he may have texted another woman. And I believe he admitted that he was texting another woman. And she saw that, got angry, and, you know, she was trying to take his phone. And so they went through that type of dynamic, and that may have been where injuries occurred. So he regrets that moment. But after that, as we saw, he ran away. And honestly, he really wasn't the aggressor from that point of view. Now, we don't know what has happened prior. We don't know if there was any type of verbal abuse, emotional abuse. They did share some text messages, if you recall, during the trial, and some voice recordings that Grace actually recorded, which was pretty interesting. In fact, during one of the recordings, Jonathan wanted her to be more like Coretta Scott King or Michelle Obama. And Linsey asked him about that because she said, look, you know, a lot of people in Black America were kind of questioning why you would want your white ex-girlfriend to be like these 2 iconic Black women. And he explained that at the time, he was a man who was pretty much on his way to doing great things. And he also explained that he just admires men like Martin Luther King and Barack Obama, and he aspires to be like that. Now, some people I've heard who spoke on this. They said, hey, you're just an actor. Why are you comparing yourself to Martin Luther King or Barack Obama? And I have to admit, that's a bit much. But just because he's an actor doesn't mean he doesn't have other aspirations. I mean, he could very well want to go on a path similar to Harry Belafonte, who was an actor but also an activist and actually worked closely with Martin Luther King. But yes, he has this thing with Coretta Scott King, and he just really explained that since he was on a path towards greatness, he wanted a partner who understood that and supported that. So that's really what he says he meant by that. And the conversation continued on, and they hit on his current relationship with Meagan Good, who was actually there with him, supporting him, and she was also supporting him throughout his trial. We saw plenty of pictures of her with him. And he, during the interview, said he has found his Coretta. So he said it again, and in my mind, again, I was just like, what is this fixation on Coretta Scott King? It did kind of give me a little pause. Because in my mind, Coretta Scott King, again, she was a woman who supported Dr. Martin Luther King, but she was a force herself. And she wasn't just in the background supporting Martin Luther King. She influenced him in many ways. In fact, she is the reason he even learned about the Gandhi principles that he would later implement during the Civil Rights Movement. She also had to deal with a lot of the stresses when he would be out and about or traveling. She had to worry about whether, quite frankly, he would be assassinated, and they had children together. So she dealt with a lot. So in my mind, I'm like, is it really fair to expect your partner to be like Coretta Scott King? She's a historical figure. Martin Luther King was a historical figure. And to me, it's just a lot of pressure on your partner to expect them to be at that level of greatness and sacrifice. Now, Meagan Good is a great woman. She is highly successful as an actress, but she's Meagan Good. She's herself. And to me, that's what you should expect her to be herself. In fact, Stevie Wonder has a song called I Can Only Be Me. You can hear it sung on one of my favorite movies, School Days. And in the lyric, he says, you can only be you as I can only be me, meaning I am my own person. And so in my mind, I hope Jonathan understands that Meagan is her own person. But I also wonder when it comes to Jonathan's possible fixation with Coretta Scott King, I'm wondering, is he prepping for a role? Because I have to admit, he probably could play Martin Luther King. He kind of could look like him. He's played in Lovecraft Country. So, he possibly could play Dr. King in an epic film, because quite frankly, there has never been an epic film on Dr. Martin Luther King. There's been television movies, I believe back in the 70s. I believe Paul Whitfield played Dr. King. I remember as a kid watching a television movie called Boy King regarding Dr. King. And then, of course, we remember Selma, directed by Ava DuVernay, which dealt with a period in King's life. But we have yet to have an epic film like the one that the great Spike Lee did on the great Malcolm X, played by the great Denzel Washington back in the 90s. We haven't had an epic film like that on Dr. King. So who knows? Maybe Jonathan Majors is preparing for that, and that's why he's so focused on Coretta Scott King. Now, speaking again on Coretta Scott King, I don't know what image Jonathan has of Coretta, but Bernice King, the daughter to Miss Coretta Scott King and Dr. Martin Luther King, she had this to say about her mother, and we have to assume that she's kind of responding to a lot of the talk that's happening currently about her mother, and this is what she said. She said, "My mother wasn't a prop. She was a peace advocate before she met my father and was instrumental in him speaking out against the Vietnam War. Please understand, my mama was a force. And then she also mentioned an article that she wrote regarding her mother to the Huffington Post titled "A Woman Purposed to Be King." And in that article, she emphasized that her mother was already whole before she even met her father. And once they even started dating and got married, she was a whole woman. She was a musician. She was a vocalist. She was a member of the NAACP. She was already an activist. And I have to say that Meagan Good is also a whole woman. So hopefully Jonathan understands that yes, you can have a woman that will support you in your dreams, but she too will have her own dreams and she will also seek your support. And I'm rooting for them. But I just hope that that is really his perception of Coretta Scott King. And Bernice King wanted to make it clear that, again, her mother was a force and a whole woman, not just a prop. And honestly, it's not clear if Bernice was just possibly responding to all of the talk surrounding Jonathan Majors and his comment on her mother. But there were also a lot of memes going around with her mother and Meagan Good that was supposed to be funny. And I have to admit, at one point I thought about sharing one of the memes, but then I thought about it and said, you know, Coretta Scott King, Dr. King, anyone of that era, that's not a joke. That's not something that you joke about. So I decided not to share it. And also, when it comes to Jonathan Majors, it's interesting that he chose to do his interview with ABC because, as some of you may know, he was actually dropped by Marvel, who is owned by the same company that owns ABC, which is Disney. And so a lot of people feel like this was a strategy on his part to do this interview with ABC, a Disney company, really as his way to say he still wants his job, of course, with Marvel. I mean, who wouldn't want that job? I'm sure it pays very well. So a lot of people feel this may be his strategy to try to get in good again with the Disney company. And time will tell, because look, I believe in redemption. Jonathan is a great actor. He again says that he has never laid his hands on any woman. And he seems to want to just move forward. And I believe we need to allow him that opportunity. And I definitely think he'll work again. He may do a lot more independent films in the meantime, but we'll see if he can get to the level again of mainstream films. But I have to say, I'm pulling for him. But what are your thoughts on Jonathan Majors and his interview with ABC's Linsey Davis? Are you willing to support any of his future projects? If so, comment below. Let's talk about it. In the meantime, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I thank you again for watching. Until next time, peace.